The knitting circle. Margaret Chen adjusted her antique glasses and peered through the quantum-reinforced windows of the Solar Sunset Retirement Community's observation deck. Her knitting needles clicked steadily as she worked on what appeared to be a simple scarf, though the seemingly decorative patterns actually contained encrypted communications protocols she developed during her former career as a quantum computing engineer. More tea, dear. Dorothy Williams, a retired military strategist who'd led Earth's first extrasolar campaign, poured from an ornate teapot that housed more scanning equipment than most planetary defense systems. The retirement community's location on the edge of human space gave them an excellent vantage point to observe traffic along the major trade routes. Thank you, Dorothy. Margaret took a sip, her augmented reality contact lenses analyzing the position of every ship within sensor range. Has anyone heard from Barbara today? She usually joins us for afternoon knitting. She's giving another one of her traditional Earth cooking classes to those lovely Centaurian refugees, said Eleanor Roberts, absently stroking her cat, a highly sophisticated AI construct that helped coordinate their surveillance network. Poor dears needed somewhere to stay after the Vex Empire seized their colony. The peaceful scene was interrupted by a flash of light outside the window. A massive Vex warship had just dropped out of hyperspace, its angular form bristling with weapons. Behind it, a small passenger vessel fled desperately toward human space. "Oh dear," Dorothy said mildly, though her cybernetically enhanced eyes were already calculating firing solutions. "It seems they're chasing another refugee ship." The women watched as the Vex ship fired a warning shot across the civilian vessel's bow. The passenger ship's shields flickered weakly. They were clearly failing. "Those monsters," Eleanor hissed, her fingers tightening around her teacup. "There are children on that ship. My cat's sensors can detect their biosignatures." Margaret set down her knitting, her grandmother's smile replaced by the stern expression that had once made corporate boards tremble. "Ladies, I believe it's time we did something about the Vex Empire. They've gone too far." "Agreed," Dorothy said, already sending encrypted messages through her teapot to their vast network of fellow retirees throughout human space. "They think we're just harmless old women. That will be their first mistake." "And their last," Eleanor added, as her cat began accessing secure databases throughout the sector. The passenger ship limped into the retirement community's defense perimeter, a zone the Vex wouldn't dare violate for fear of provoking humanity. The warship pulled up short, its weapons still trained on their position. "Barbara's going to need to bake more cookies," Margaret observed, picking up her knitting again. The encrypted pattern she was working on would give them access to the Vex Empire's primary financial networks. "We'll have more guests to care for." "I'll update the duty roster," Dorothy agreed. "And perhaps it's time we activated Operation Granddaughter's Revenge." The other women nodded solemnly. They had spent decades in their respective fields: military, technology, intelligence, and dozens of other specialties. Now, in their retirement, they had found a new purpose: protecting the innocent from those who would abuse power. "The Vex Empire is about to learn a very important lesson," Margaret said, her needles clicking with deadly precision. "Never underestimate a grandmother's ability to solve problems." As the refugee ship docked safely in their harbor, the women continued their seemingly innocent activities. To any observer, they were simply elderly humans enjoying their retirement. None would guess that this knitting circle was about to unravel an empire. The cat purred, its quantum processors already infiltrating Vex communication networks. Dorothy's teapot mapped the locations of every Vex military installation within 50 light-years. Margaret's knitting pattern evolved into a virus that would cripple the Empire's financial systems. The galaxy was about to discover why humanity had survived and thrived among the stars, not just through force of arms or technological prowess, but through the wisdom, cunning, and implacable determination of those who looked harmless but carried centuries of collective experience. And no one, threatened children in front of human grandmothers. Tea time and battle plans. Barbara Martinez's famous chocolate chip cookies wafted through the retirement community's common room, the scent masking the sophisticated quantum encryption suite hidden in her vintage oven. As she baked, her neural implants, relics from her days as an xenolinguistics expert, processed communications from across Vex space. The refugee children are settled in, she reported to the others gathered for afternoon tea. Poor things. Their parents told me the Vex have been systematically dismantling their education systems, replacing them with propaganda centers. Dorothy stirred her tea thoughtfully, her cybernetic eyes reviewing tactical data streams. Classic suppression strategy. Keep the population ignorant, maintain control. I saw it dozens of times during the Proxima conflicts. Well, they picked the wrong grandmothers to try it with, Margaret declared, her knitting needles moving in precise patterns that were actually programming advanced attack algorithms. I've already identified 17 vulnerabilities in their banking network. Sloppy encryption. They rely too much on their reputation for brutality to protect them. Eleanor's AI cat jumped onto the table, projecting a holographic star map from its eyes. Red dots indicated Vex military installations, while blue showed their propaganda centers. My network of strays has been very busy, she said, referring to the autonomous AI probes she'd disguised as house pets throughout Vex space. They're planning something big, a mass relocation of undesirable populations. The grandmothers exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen this before, in humanity's darker history. Barbara set down a fresh plate of cookies, their arrangement forming a complex mathematical formula that would help crack Vex security protocols. Ladies, Dorothy said, lifting her teacup in a gesture that activated quantum-entangled communicators across 3 sectors. I believe it's time for Phase 1. Margaret, is your virus ready? Margaret held up her completed scarf, actually a physical manifestation of complex code that would devastate the Vex financial systems. Ready and eager, Eleanor's pets can distribute it through their networks. My cooking class tomorrow has 6 Vex diplomatic staff enrolled, Barbara added with a gentle smile that belied her steel resolve. They think they're gathering intelligence on human culture. Instead, they'll be taking home some very special recipes. Her cookies contain nanobots that would map the Vex diplomatic corps' neural networks. The cat purred and rolled over, a gesture that launched 50 infiltration programs simultaneously. On the holographic map, tiny points of light began to spread like a web through Vex space. Remember, ladies, Eleanor said, scratching her cat's ears, we're not just fighting for these refugees. We're fighting for every child who deserves a future free from fear, just like we did for our own children and grandchildren. Dorothy's teapot quietly recorded everything, building an irrefutable case against the Vex Empire that would eventually be presented to the Galactic Council. But that would come later. For now, they had work to do. To think, Margaret chuckled, starting a new pattern that would compromise the Vex military's targeting systems. They dismissed us as primitive because we still enjoy traditional handicrafts. They never stopped to wonder why a species advanced enough for quantum travel would maintain such practices. Their arrogance will be their downfall, Barbara agreed, loading another batch of cookies into her oven. The quantum scanners hidden within would analyze the molecular structure of Vex technology through their diplomatic staff's clothing fibers. The afternoon wore on peacefully. To any observer, it was simply another day at the Solar Sunset retirement community. No one would suspect that these grandmothers were systematically dismantling an empire's defenses while sharing tea and cookies. Eleanor's cat stretched and yawned, a signal that the first wave of cyber attacks had successfully penetrated Vex outer security. Dorothy's teapot hummed softly as it coordinated with retired military officers throughout human space, positioning assets for the coming confrontation. Margaret's knitting grew longer, each stitch another line of code in their digital assault. As the artificial sun began to set outside their windows, Barbara began preparing dinner for their refugee guests. You know, she said thoughtfully, my grandmother always told me that the most dangerous weapon in the universe was a woman who appeared harmless but carried generations of wisdom. I never truly understood what she meant until now. The others nodded in agreement. They had spent their lives building, protecting, and nurturing civilization. Now, in their retirement, they would do it one last time, not with warships or armies, but with knitting needles, teapots, cookies, and cats. The Vex Empire was about to learn why humanity had survived every threat it had ever faced, because when the innocent were threatened, even grandmothers would go to war. Cookies and chaos. The Vex Empire's central banking authority was having a very bad day. Their quantum-encrypted financial networks had been compromised by what appeared to be a knitting pattern. Their military communication systems were overwhelmed with recipes for chocolate chip cookies, and somehow every security camera in their facilities had been hacked by what their best analysts swore were cat videos. Meanwhile, in the Solar Sunset retirement community, Margaret Chen calmly poured herself another cup of tea. Phase 1 is proceeding exactly as planned, she announced, checking the data streams flowing through her antique glasses. Their entire financial system will be gridlocked within the hour. Excellent, Dorothy Williams replied, her cybernetic eyes tracking the chaos spreading through Vex space. My old squadron contacts report their military vessels are receiving conflicting orders. Apparently, their command protocols now require approval from something called Grandma's Knitting Circle before they can fire weapons. Barbara Martinez emerged from her kitchen, carrying a fresh batch of cookies that contained microscopic quantum computers. The Vex diplomatic staff just left my cooking class. They were quite pleased with their take-home recipes. She smiled innocently. They had no idea each recipe book contained a virus that will rewrite their propaganda networks to broadcast educational programs instead. Eleanor's AI cat prowled the common room, its tail twitching as it coordinated thousands of infiltration programs. My pets have successfully compromised their security grids, she reported. Every detention center holding refugee children now reports directly to us. The Vex guards think they're still in control, but we can override their systems at any time. The retirement community's quantum-reinforced windows showed a steady stream of ships entering their space, more refugees seeking sanctuary. The Vex Empire's iron grip was beginning to slip, and word was spreading quickly through the underground networks. We've received an interesting transmission, Dorothy said, checking her teapot's surveillance feeds. The Vex High Command is in complete disarray. Apparently, they can't understand how their military-grade encryption was broken by, and I quote, primitive human females engaging in obsolete craft practices. Margaret's knitting needles clicked steadily as she added another layer of code to their cyber assault. Perhaps if they'd spent more time understanding human culture, they'd know that our craftwork has always been a way of encoding and preserving information. The first computer programs were based on weaving patterns, after all. Barbara's oven pinged, and she retrieved another batch of cookies. The nanobots from my last diplomatic cooking class have mapped their entire neural network. Would you believe they're still using single-factor biological authentication? Amateur hour. Eleanor stroked her cat, which purred as it launched another wave of infiltration programs. The refugee support network is growing. My pets report that 17 other species have pledged assistance. Turns out we weren't the only ones waiting for a chance to oppose the Vex. The artificial sun outside cast long shadows across the common room as the grandmothers continued their work. Dorothy's teapot intercepted a particularly desperate transmission from Vex High Command. Oh my, she chuckled. They're offering a reward for information about the terrorist organization responsible for these attacks. They're convinced it must be some elite human military unit. If they only knew, Barbara said, arranging her cookies in a pattern that would transmit activation codes to their hidden allies. Although I suppose we are elite in our own way. Between us, we have over 3 centuries of combined experience in our fields. Margaret finished another row of her knitting, completing a subroutine that would turn the Vex Empire's automated defense systems against them. Experience they dismissed because it came wrapped in gray hair and comfort shoes. Their anthropologists really should have studied Earth's history more carefully. Speaking of history, Eleanor interjected. My cat just intercepted some fascinating documents. The Vex Empire's entire foundation is built on stolen technology and suppressed innovations from conquered species. How convenient that all this evidence is now finding its way to the Galactic Council. Dorothy's teapot hummed as it coordinated with their growing network of allies. The Vex are trying to track down our operations center. They've searched 15 military bases and 4 underground bunkers so far. She smiled. No one's thought to check the retirement homes. Why would they? Margaret asked, her needles never stopping. To them, we're just obsolete humans practicing obsolete skills. They don't understand that wisdom doesn't become obsolete. Barbara began preparing dinner for their expanding refugee population, her cooking instruments doubling as sophisticated surveillance gear. My grandmother used to say that the most dangerous opponent is the one you don't believe can hurt you. I wonder if the Vex are beginning to understand that yet. Outside their windows, more ships arrived carrying refugees from across Vex space. The grandmother's reputation was spreading. If you needed help, if you had nowhere else to go, seek out the human retirement communities. There you would find safety, comfort, and perhaps a few cookies. And if you were an oppressive empire, you would find your worst nightmare. Grandmothers with a cause, armed with centuries of experience and a profound intolerance for those who harmed children. The power of wisdom. The Vex Empire's supreme commander stood before his war council, his scaled hands trembling with rage as he read the latest reports. Their military fleets were paralyzed, financial systems in chaos, and propaganda networks hijacked. Most humiliating of all, their secure communications now played something called bingo night updates on an endless loop. Meanwhile, in the cozy observation lounge of the Solar Sunset Retirement Community, Margaret Chen held up her completed scarf to admire her work. The complex quantum code woven into its pattern had just finished encrypting every Vex weapon system with an unbreakable grandmother's knot. I believe it's time for the final phase, she announced, adjusting her antique glasses as they processed tactical data. Barbara, how are our special guests doing? Barbara looked up from her kitchen console, where she was simultaneously coordinating refugee evacuations and baking snickerdoodles. The Vex Diplomatic Corps is completely compromised. Those cooking-class nanobots have given us control of their entire neural network. They're currently convinced their emperor is a potted plant. Excellent. Dorothy's cybernetic eyes flickered as she reviewed the strategic situation through her teapot's sensors. My old military contacts report the Vex fleet is in complete disarray. Half their ships are locked in an endless game of space bingo, and the other half can't fire their weapons without solving one of Margaret's knitting patterns. Eleanor's AI cat stretched lazily on her lap, its quantum processors coordinating the final strikes against Vex infrastructure. My pets have complete control of their security systems. Every detention center, military base, and government facility now answers to us, though they still haven't figured that out. The artificial sunlight streaming through the windows took on a reddish hue, marking the approach of evening. More refugee ships arrived hourly, protected by the retirement community's formidable defense grid, disguised as ordinary garden ornaments. The Galactic Council is reviewing our evidence, Margaret reported, starting a new MITting project that would become the final shutdown code for the Vex Empire's remaining systems. Turns out when you have centuries of combined experience and intelligence, military strategy, and advanced technology, you can build quite a compelling case. Barbara's oven chimed, and she retrieved another batch of cookies, these ones containing quantum computers programmed to rewrite Vex legal codes. Their entire society was built on suppressing information and controlling education. They never imagined their downfall would come through sugar cookies and knitting circles. Dorothy's teapot intercepted a particularly frantic transmission from Vex High Command. Oh my, she chuckled. They're still searching military installations for our secret base. They've even started investigating kindergartens, convinced we must be using children's drawings to hide our plans. The power of assumptions, Eleanor mused, scratching her cat behind its ears as it launched the final wave of cyber attacks. They assumed that because we were old, we were harmless. Because we maintained traditional skills, we were primitive. Because we showed kindness, we were weak. Margaret's knitting needles clicked steadily as she encoded the Empire's death warrant into her pattern. They forgot that humanity survived and thrived among the stars not just through force, but through wisdom, through the accumulated knowledge of generations, passed down in ways they never bothered to understand. The cat's eyes glowed as it projected a holographic map showing the collapse of Vex authority spreading across their territory like a slow, inevitable tide. Detention centers emptied as their security systems mysteriously failed. Military vessels found themselves responding to orders from Grandma's Cookie Committee. Government databases began publishing their contents directly to the Galactic Council. I intercepted their last emergency protocol, Barbara said, arranging her cookies in a pattern that would transmit the final activation codes. They're attempting to reboot their entire network from scratch. Would anyone like to tell them that their backup systems have been serving my recipe collection for the past week? Dorothy raised her teacup in a toast that simultaneously activated sleeper programs throughout Vex space. To the power of grandmothers, underestimated since the beginning of time, and still changing the universe one cookie at a time. Through the quantum-reinforced windows, they could see the lights of more refugee ships approaching. The word had spread far and wide. If you needed help, if you sought justice, look for the human retirement communities. Look for the grandmothers who had engineered the downfall of an empire with knitting needles, teapots, and cookies. As the artificial sun set on another busy day, the grandmothers continued their seemingly innocent activities. Margaret knitted. Barbara baked. Dorothy poured tea. Eleanor petted her cat. And throughout Vex space, an empire that had lasted for centuries crumbled before the combined wisdom and determination of those it had foolishly dismissed as harmless. Legacy of the Grandmothers. 1 year after what galactic historians now called the Grandmothers' Revolution, the observation lounge of the Solar Sunset Retirement Community hosted an unusual gathering. Representatives from 17 species shared tea and cookies while Margaret Chen put the finishing touches on her latest creation, a quantum-encrypted blanket that would become the foundation for a new interstellar refugee protection network. "I still can't quite believe it," said Ambassador Zix of the former Vex territories, now a federation of independent worlds. An empire that stood for centuries, brought down by a knitting circle. The ambassador's tentacles curled appreciatively around a chocolate chip cookie, their neural sensors long since reprogrammed by Barbara's nanobots to appreciate Earth cuisine. Dorothy Williams smiled as her teapot scanned the gathered dignitaries, more out of habit than necessity these days. "That's the thing about wisdom," she said. "It doesn't always announce itself with warships and weapons. Sometimes it comes with tea and sympathy." Eleanor's AI cat prowled between the guests, its quantum processors now helping coordinate humanitarian aid across the reformed territories. The real victory wasn't destroying the empire, she noted, watching refugee children from a dozen worlds playing in the community's gardens. It was showing the galaxy a better way. Barbara emerged from her kitchen, carrying a fresh batch of cookies that contained nothing more dangerous than chocolate chips, though her cooking classes remained the most popular diplomatic training program in known space. "The Galactic Council's report made for interesting reading," she said. "Apparently, they're still trying to understand how we did it." "Let them wonder," Margaret replied, her knitting needles clicking peacefully as she worked. "Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that keep people guessing." The artificial sunlight painted the room in warm hues, highlighting the changes of the past year. Where once they had watched refugee ships fleeing persecution, now they saw cultural exchange vessels and educational cruisers. The retirement community had become a center for interstellar cooperation, though few realized it was still the headquarters of the most sophisticated intelligence network in known space. "The educational reforms are proceeding well," reported a Centaurian diplomat, their crystalline form shimmering with approval. "Using your grandmother's teaching methods, we've helped millions of children overcome the effects of Vex propaganda." Dorothy's cybernetic eyes twinkled. Education was always the key. The Vex maintained power by controlling information. We won by sharing it, along with some cookies. Eleanor stroked her cat, which purred as it processed data from across the reformed territories. The best part is watching them try to explain it in the military academies. How do you teach tactical students to defend against weaponized kindness? You don't, Margaret said, holding up her latest creation. The quantum-encrypted blanket shimmered with patterns that would ensure no child in known space could ever be detained or trafficked again. You teach them why they shouldn't want to. Through the windows, they could see other retirement communities under construction, each one a combination of peaceful sanctuary and sophisticated defense installation. The galaxy had learned that wherever human grandmothers gathered, justice and cookies would surely follow. "There's a story on my world," Ambassador Zix said thoughtfully, reaching for another cookie, "about how wisdom appears not as a mighty warrior, but as an elder who offers food and shelter. I never understood it until I met you all." Barbara smiled as she began preparing dinner for their expanded family of residents and guests. "Every culture has similar stories," she said, "about the power of those who seem harmless but carry generations of knowledge. The Vex forgot those stories. We helped them remember." The artificial sun began to set, casting long shadows across the observation lounge. Margaret's knitting needles continued their steady rhythm. Dorothy's teapot hummed softly. Eleanor's cat purred contentedly, and Barbara's oven filled the air with the scent of home. They were no longer just four grandmothers who had brought down an empire. They were the guardians of a new way of thinking about power and wisdom in the galaxy. Their legacy lived on in every reformed detention center turned into a school, every propaganda station converted to a library, every military base transformed into a cultural center. And if somewhere in the galaxy someone still thought to prey on the innocent or abuse power, they would find themselves facing an unstoppable force. Grandmothers with Wi-Fi, wisdom, and an unlimited supply of cookies. The universe had learned a lesson that humanity had known for millennia. Never underestimate the power of grandmothers. They had seen the worst of history and helped build the best of the future. They carried within them not just years, but generations of wisdom. And they were always happy to share a cookie and teach that wisdom to others, whether those others wanted to learn or not.